Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. It's been such a nice day today. The weather's been mild, doesn't appear to be any rain on the horizon, and it's just a good day for sitting out in my backyard and relaxing a little bit, watching the chickens scratch around and watching my favorite turkey go about her life. Today puts me in a mood, however, for something tasty, I think. Let's do a little cookout, perhaps, with our stories today. And I think the best place to start would be breakfast, maybe. Something to get us in the mood. Let's hear a story by Ethan Cord about a strange breakfast cereal that proclaims to be magically delicious.
I always went to the same supermarket I'd gone to essentially my whole life. It was a ritual to swing by after work a few days each week and pick up dinner for the family, along with a few other groceries. I contemplated breakfast cereal choices as I stared at the same cracked vinyl tile in the same aisle I've stood in many times before, with the same old-school luminescent light bulbs flickering overhead. As much as it might have embarrassed me when I was younger to say, my guilty pleasure has always been sugary cereal. Ever since I was a kid, I've always been a fan of whatever had marshmallows in it, especially the ones everyone saw on TV. They're magically delicious, I thought to myself, while reminiscing of those old commercials, and opted to buy the name brand for once instead of the knockoffs that tasted half stale most of the time. I felt even more amused when I noticed the upper top label that promised a special surprise in that limited edition run of boxes. I normally wouldn't have gone for any of this, but my wife had already informed me that her and the kids would be having dinner with her parents that night, and not to expect them home before I went to bed. I usually left for my job at the walnut packing factory every morning at 4:30 a.m., so I usually tried to be in bed by 9:30. So I thought, why not just enjoy a bowl of cereal before bed on this particular evening? Truth be told, I'd lived out the usual cliche of marrying my high school sweetheart and never leaving the small town I'd grown up in. I'd planned to pursue a career as an engineer, but my collegiate career was cut short by baby number one when I was 19 years old. So I did the right thing and got a job at the walnut processing factory, and just summed up the whole rest of my life with that. By the time the third kid had arrived, my one-time sweetheart was now constantly enraged by the sight of me. There were many nights that she and the kids, who were now teenagers and also disdained my existence, would simply choose to have dinner elsewhere. I was, at this point, the slob that paid the bills and was a hindrance to their joy in life, it seemed. I chuckled to myself as the acne-riddled cashier rang up the cereal, because I knew my wife would nag at me for daring to buy expensive cereal just for myself. As I loaded the groceries into my old Toyota, though, I thought that I heard a voice coming from one of the bags. I shook it off as the long day taking its toll on me, but then I swore that I saw a red glow in my back seat that I just happened to catch for a second in my rearview mirror. I can't explain why, but when I got home, I quickly found the box of cereal, opened and peeled the plastic bag open, started pouring myself a bowl. That's when I heard the little thunk and quickly remembered the promise of a surprise in every box. It, too, was wrapped in a little plastic baggie, and when I opened it, it kind of startled me. There was that familiar image, the shamrock green attire and top hat, along with the red hair sticking out from underneath that hat, the blank stare in its eyes as it faced forward, and an almost eerie grin that spread across its face in a far too natural way, all in a 5-inch tall figure. The thing creeped me out, if I'm being honest, so I shoved it into the spare kitchen drawer where we kept our batteries. I inadvertently hit the button I never realized was on the back side of the figurine. This caused the eyes to light up and a small recording to repeat, "They're magically delicious," in an Irish accent. I felt more than a little unnerved by the idea that was supposed to be a children's toy, but I shrugged it off and proceeded to shut the drawer, as I downed not one, but 2 bowls of the marshmallowy goodness that night. After I finished, I headed out of the kitchen upstairs and paused to look towards the box of cereal. Thanks for a trip down memory lane and a nice treat, but I'm afraid your magic can't fix all my problems, before I continued upstairs towards my bedroom. I was only halfway up the stairs when I thought I heard something along the lines of, "Let's test your luck," and a dull red glow casting shadows from the kitchen. I was either extremely tired or I was losing it, so I admittedly jetted up the stairs, feeling a bit creeped out. Usually I'd stay awake until I heard my family arrive downstairs on nights like this. Then I'd go to sleep. They might hate the sight of me, but I still felt the innate sense of ensuring they were safe. That night, though, I fell almost immediately into one of the deepest sleeps I'd ever experienced, and dreamt all night about things I'd long given up on. In my dreams, I was at a college out east somewhere, top of my class, and a top engineering job already waiting for me when I graduated. I also had a supermodel girlfriend who was pursuing a degree in fashion, and we were planning a weekend away together on the coast, when a red glow overcame my dreams and an almost primal-sounding scream jolted me out of sleep. I reached over instinctively to check my wife. She wasn't there, which gave me a slight pause, but she was known to sleep in the spare bedroom when she felt especially annoyed by me. Still, that scream had me on edge, so I bolted out of bed and started down the stairs. That's when I heard the second scream and recognized it immediately as my oldest son. I darted down the stairs as fast as I could, and as I did, my nostrils were assaulted by the most metallic smell that I couldn't place in my state of panic at that moment. I saw a red glow come and go in waves in my descent, and then I swore I heard the sound of the most disgusting type of slurping noise, much like when a 4-year-old eats spaghetti. I ran straight around the corner towards the kitchen, but I slipped immediately on the tiles and slammed the back of my head on the landing. When I tried to get up, I kept slipping and losing my grip from something wet and slimy on the floor. I finally crawled to the light switch by the refrigerator, and when I turned it on, I yelled aloud when I realized the floor was covered in blood. Not just a little bit of blood either. It was literally everywhere in the kitchen. On the table, handprints on the cabinet and fridge, pools of it leading to the living room and onto the carpet. It wasn't just blood either. The viscera reminded me of the summers I spent at the local poultry processing as a teen. There was a piece of, something once living everywhere, and I looked in that kitchen along with shreds of clothing that I recognized as belonging to my wife. I started screaming for my family, but received no response. In a panic, I rushed all over the house, but I saw no evidence of any of them anywhere. That is, except for the blood and carnage that the entire house was covered in. I didn't want to believe what I knew the source of all of that was, though. I scrambled to find my cell phone that was tucked away in my jacket on the kitchen chair the night before and dialed 911. Right as I started to dial, though, I saw the red glow again. This time, I realized exactly where it was coming from. Not from the drawer any longer, but right in front of the kitchen table. The light intensified beyond what any reasonable person would believe possible for the figurine. Then I heard a familiar, distorted voice begin to play. "They're magically delicious." It was then that I realized that the grin on its face had dropped into an even deeper arc, and the figurine was absolutely coated in deep, red blood. To my astonishment, I realized now that I was actually seeing its plastic mouth break free of its natural boundaries, and its lips began to move as it repeated itself. Ahem! I said they were magically delicious. I yelled at him with the most fear and rage a being could ever muster up within themselves, and asked where my family was. Your wish was my command, my friend. You're free man now. So let's say you and I go find what's at the end of the rainbow, eh? Besides, they truly were magically delicious.
Well, now that we've had a little breakfast, a little appetizer, if you will, let's go on to maybe some pastries, maybe a little coffee, while we hear about a little kindness.
Mel was having a cup of coffee at his favorite little spot one day, when something would take place that he would never forget. He was sitting at the bar area, people watching, as he often did, when an older man and his granddaughter walked in. The two were a study in contrasts. She a young waif so full of life and potential, he a stunted creature whose life was almost used up. His cane was barely audible over the general clamor, but Mel still heard the harsh chock, chock, chock as he walked across the tiled floor. The sight of him made Mel chuckle, though every step seemed to threaten to spill him to the floor. He held the girl's hand in his wrinkled one, and she beamed up at him with genuine love. They were standing in line for a booth, the coffee shop very busy, and as the girl gabbled happily to herself, the old man leaning on his stick, taking it all in as if just happy to be able to still take in anything. Mel felt that his interest was becoming voyeuristic, but he just couldn't look away from the pair. They were so different from the usual people that flitted into the shop, and it appeared that he wasn't alone. Two women and one of them had noticed the pair as well. Mel spent some time observing them as well, hoping to see the same interest or happiness that he had felt. But what he saw was very different. The girl appeared to be filled with a mixture of trepidation, fear, and resolve that Mel had never seen before. Mel had felt like a voyeur, but the young girl was like a hawk who's seen a rabbit. She didn't look away, seemed unself-conscious of her attention, and had eyes only for the little girl and her grandfather. The other said something to her, grabbed her arm fretfully, but she pulled away as she said something quick and harsh to her. As they waited, the little girl suddenly noticed the pair and told the girl how pretty she looked. The girl's attention was broken suddenly as she looked down at the little girl in surprise. She bent down on a knee, and Mel could see her point to the little girl's shirt and say something that made her giggle. Then she pointed to the old man, her lips asking if this was her grandpa, and the girl giggled as she answered that this was her papa as she clung to the man's hand. He turned to give the girls a slight nod and a smile before turning back to the barista who had arrived to seat them. The two girls watched them go before seeming to decide to come to the bar, where Mel was sitting instead of waiting for a booth as well. As they took their seats beside him, the one who had been watching so intently was still staring at the pair. As the old man smiled happily at the young girl and the doll that she was dancing across the table, the girl's face kept that same look of resolve. She clearly had something to do, something she was loath to do, but had to do, nonetheless. It was clear that it had something to do with the old man and his daughter. They're quite the pair, aren't they? Mel asked, making her jump as she blushed shyly, having been caught looking. You have no idea, she said, her accent strange and exotic. Mel thought she might be from the Middle East, or maybe Northern Europe. The barista came around about that time and took her order. Mel couldn't help but notice the resemblance. The two girls were quite dark, their hair long and black as it spilled down their backs, and as the one with the intense stare leaned in to whisper to the waitress, Mel saw the new girl look over at the pair sitting at the table. She nodded and brought the two girls coffee, as she went to bustle in the kitchen. "Do you know them?" Mel asked, becoming very curious as the exchange went on. "Unfortunately, I do," the girl told him, sipping her coffee. The longer he looked at the girl, the more Mel suspected that she was foreign. This was Sweden, of course. There were foreigners everywhere these days. But she also looked foreign in that way that people look out of time. The girl, as he thought of her, was likely in her mid-20s, but her eyes led him to believe that she had lived more in those 20 years than Mel had in his 37. She had lived through terrible times, seen atrocities, and had come out on the other side. He noticed movement from the table where the little girl sat with her father, and she squealed a little as a mountain of whipped cream and sprinkles was delivered atop some chocolate confection. To the father went a far more sensible coffee and a scone, and Mel thought the old man might have made out better. The shop's scones were to die for, and were less likely to put you into diabetic shock. "You probably just made that little girl's day," Mel said offhandedly, guessing the woman had sent the order there. She sighed. "I hope so. I would like to give her some joy on what may be the worst day of her life." Mel looked at her questioningly, but the woman had eyes only for the old man as he sipped before adding sugar to his coffee. "I met him in 2007 when I was 12 years old, and I've spent the last 17 years tracking him down. He has been my sole obsession, my reason for living, and every time I thought I might simply lie down and die, his face pushes me on." She stiffened a little as he looked down at the scone, but his granddaughter did something to steal his attention, and he looked away. "Must be a hell of a story," Mel commented. "Would you like to hear it?" she asked, still not looking away from the old man. "It appears we have some time." Mel wanted to decline, but instead he nodded as he invited her to continue. "It all started when the Russian army invaded our lands." When she started talking, there was no way that he could make her stop. Once she got started, there was no way he would want her to. "When I was little, we lived on a farm far from here. Our town was small, little more than a farming community, but we were happy. My family kept goats, sheep, chickens, cows, and horses. We made a living selling milk and eggs, wool and cheese, and our family was large. I had 9 siblings, 5 boys and 4 girls, and we helped my mother and father with the daily chores and the running of the farm. So when the Russian army pushed a little further, we became afraid. We could see the smoke, we could hear the gunfire sometimes, and the army was nowhere to be seen. The townspeople raised a militia, but it was no match for the might of the Red Army. They shot our young soldiers, our hunters, our ranchers, and marched into the town over the backs of the broken. We could see them from our farm. Father had not joined them, and we knew that the bad times would soon be upon us." She paused, watching as the man took the scone in his hand before setting it down again. She sighed, saying something in a language I didn't know, before continuing. "We were all brought into the town the next day, some of us by force, and taken to the meeting hall in town so we could meet our new overseer. The mayor had stood with the men of the militia and had been killed, so the man who stood on the stage was as different from the mayor as night to day. The mayor was a big bear of a man, and he was kind to his friends and neighbors. This man, slight and wearing a military uniform, looked more like Father Christmas. He was an older man, his face a smiling mask that he showed us with great excitement. His eyes, however, reflected none of the smile on his face. He told us his name was Major Krishker, and that he would treat us as well as we treated him. That turned out to be a lie. For the first few weeks, all proceeded as normal. The soldiers and the overseers toured the town, took in the farms, saw the markets, met the people. The man was courteous, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. The people thought that maybe the occupation would not be so bad. Perhaps he would be a kind overseer, and when he moved on, the town would still be as it had been. They could not have known how short a time that peace would be. It began with simple theft. The soldiers came to our farms and demanded that we give them a portion of our crops. Not much, they said, only an amount that came to around 25% of our total crop. Now, the mayor had always requested a third, so Father was excited that we wanted less. The mayor had already taken his share, however, and Father told the soldiers this. Taking more would cut into the food we had for winter, but the soldiers said he didn't care. "You will give us what we ask for, or it will be taken," they said, and thus we gave it to them. My brothers, none of whom had gone to fight, became angry at this, but Father told them it would be okay. It is not winter yet, and we will grow a little more before it comes. Next came the conscriptions. They told every male over the age of 16 in the village that they would be conscripted into the Red Army. They would be trained, they would be paid, and they would be able to send money back to their families. 3 of my brothers were of this age, and they were taken for training, despite their protests. My father continued to say that this was okay. They would send money back, and our lives might be better. Father had forbidden any of his children to join the militia, but it seemed the war would take them nonetheless. My older brothers left on a truck that day, and we never received money or letters, or saw them ever again. Mel began to worry about the direction of this story. He was expecting a heartwarming tale about someone helping a town in a time of strife. He had hoped that maybe the girl was repaying a kindness to the old man, but the longer the story went on, the less and less he thought it was so. Taking another look at the little girl, who was dancing her doll around the sugary confection, Mel thought she looked different from the old man who sat across from her. Her hair was darker, her features less harsh, but she was young, and he was very old. With so many of the men gone, next came the brutality. The soldiers didn't need to tax anymore. They came and took what they wanted. Our cows, our chickens, our sheep, our goats, our crops. Even a few of my sisters were taken in by the soldiers and came back with bruises and tear-streaked faces. I was young, but I saw the look they gave me as well. My father kept me home, not wanting me to go to the village, but when the food prices rose and our trade began to dwindle, Father found it hard to feed his remaining children. It was only myself, my younger sister Hetz, and my other sister, Gretel, and my older sister, Farah, and, of course, my older brother, Philip. Mother and Father tried their best, but when the overseer came to our farm one day, Father knew he couldn't hide me any longer. He came to the house, introducing himself as if we didn't already know who he was, and sat at my parents' table to discuss the reason for his visit. He insisted I be there, a girl barely 13, and I remember hating the way he looked at me. He said he had seen me in the market and wanted me to come and stay with him at his villa, saying he would give me a better life and offer me opportunities I wouldn't receive here. Father knew why he wanted me. We all did, but my surprise was real when he agreed. He took the man's hand and promised to send me to him the very next day. "Let us get her ready, and we will bring her to your villa tomorrow," he said to the overseer. And the man was happy. He left, and Father got to work. He knew what it would mean if he defied this man, and he had seen the stockades in the square, but he didn't care. They had taken his oldest sons, his livelihood, and he'd be damned if he would let them take his daughter, too. Father loaded me into a grain wagon, and my siblings took me out of town. As we left, I peeked from the back and realized I could be seeing my home for the last time. I found it hard to be quiet as we went, and my crying must have attracted attention. Some of the soldiers stopped us and threatened to search the wagon. Sara was the oldest. Father had tasked her with keeping us safe, and when she offered to go off with the soldiers if they would let us pass, we knew we would never see her again. My brother Philip took the reins, and we left Sara behind. I never saw my parents again. I never saw my brothers again. We kept moving until we came to a town where we had cousins. They helped us and gave us shelter, but I never forgot that man or what he did to our village. We learned later that he took all he could from the land and left it to ruin. He hung my father and my mother and took Sara as his wife. He left us orphans, destitute, and I've never stopped thinking about that man. When I heard that he had fled here to escape justice after being declared a war criminal, I knew our time for revenge had come. Mel had been so focused on the story that he didn't look back at the man until he started gagging. His hands were on his throat, his face puffing as he hacked, and the little girl was now asking if he was okay. There was real fear in her voice, and people were trying to help him. But in the fuss, only Mel saw the other girl, the one who had come in with the storyteller, take the girl by the hand and lead her away. The little girl looked back only a single time, calling for her papa, before the two left. Mel heard the storyteller get up, but before she left, she turned to give him one final detail. The little girl is my niece, Farah's child by this man who is old enough to be her grandfather. Farah died before he went into hiding, but when we heard that he had fled with a little girl, we knew what we had to do. I remembered one other thing when I was planning this. When he came to the house to ask my father to send me, he told my mother 3 things as she offered him tea and cakes. The first was that he took his coffee black. The second, that he could not abide dairy. And the third was that he had a strong allergy to nuts. She smiled, dipping into a bow as the barista who had served the two told her it was time to go. When you tell the people how I killed one of Russia's monsters, tell them I killed him not with a gun, not with a sword, but with a scone that hid a hand full of walnuts.
One always has to be careful when assessing the ingredients of any particular dish. Speaking of, let's head into a memory that keeps repeating itself. Let's go have breakfast in a place where we're stuck in an endless cycle, written by our very own Society Menace.
I never thought I'd dread waking up, but here I am, eyes squeezed shut, praying that when I open them, I'll see something, anything different. My name's Marcus Thomas, 32 years old, and I'm trapped in a nightmare that I can't escape. It started like any other day. I remember it perfectly. Every little detail. The smell of coffee brewing downstairs. The sound of Aisha humming in the kitchen. The warmth of the sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. I sat up, stretching, and glanced at the clock. 7:15 a.m., right on schedule. I padded downstairs, following the scent of breakfast. Aisha stood at the stove, her back to me, swaying slightly as she flipped pancakes. Her dark curls were piled up on her head, and she wore my old college t-shirt, the one with the hole in the sleeve that she refused to throw away. "Morning, beautiful," I said, wrapping my arms around her waist and planting a kiss on her neck. She laughed and leaned back against me. "Morning, sleepyhead. I was beginning to think you'd sleep through your alarm again." "Not a chance," I replied, reaching around her to snag a piece of bacon from a plate on the counter. "Can't be late today. Big presentation, remember? Aisha swatted my hand playfully. How could I forget? You've been stressing about it for weeks. We ate breakfast together, chatting about our plans for the day. Aisha had a busy schedule at the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade. I had my presentation to the board, which could lead to a big promotion if it went well. As I was finishing my coffee, Aisha glanced at her watch. Oh, I better get going. Parent-teacher conference this afternoon, so I need to get there early to set up. She stood, grabbing her bag and her keys. I rose to walk her to the door, as I always did. Knock 'em dead, babe, she said, stretching up on her toes to kiss me goodbye. You're gonna do great. Thanks. Have a good day. Love you, I said, squeezing her hand. Love you too, she called over her shoulder as she headed for the car. I watched her pull out of the driveway, waving as she drove. Then I went back inside to finish getting ready for work. The day passed in a blur of meetings and last-minute preparations. By the time my presentation rolled around at 3 p.m., I was running on pure adrenaline and caffeine. But it went well, better than I'd hoped, actually. The board seemed impressed, and my boss even hinted at that promotion as we wrapped up. I was on cloud 9 as I packed up my things, ready to head home and celebrate with Aisha. I pulled out my phone to call her, wanting to share the good news right away. That's when everything changed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice I didn't recognize answered it. Hello? Is this Marcus Thomas? My stomach dropped. Something in the woman's tone sent ice through my veins. Yes, this is Marcus, I replied, my voice suddenly hoarse. Who is this? Mr. Thomas, this is Nurse Reeves at Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Aisha. There's been an accident. The world tilted on its axis. I grabbed the edge of the desk, knuckles turning white. What happened? Is she okay? The pause before the nurse responded lasted an eternity. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thomas. Your wife was brought in about an hour ago. There was a multi-car pileup on the highway. The doctors did everything they could, but I'm afraid she didn't make it. I'm so sorry for your loss. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the floor. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. I'd just seen Aisha this morning. We made plans for dinner. She was fine. She had to be fine. The next few hours passed in a haze. Somehow, I made it to the hospital. I remember the harsh fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the pitying looks from the staff, and then seeing her lying there so still, so unlike the vibrant woman I'd kissed goodbye this morning. I don't know how long I sat there, holding her hand, willing her to wake up, to smile at me once more, to tell me this was all a cruel joke. But she didn't. Eventually, a gentle-voiced doctor came to take me away, to discuss arrangements I couldn't begin to comprehend. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember climbing the stairs to our bedroom. Our bed, where Alicia would never sleep again. I just remember collapsing onto the mattress, still in my suit, and praying that when I woke up, this would all be a terrible dream. Sleep came, eventually, a blessed escape from the crushing weight of grief. And then I opened my eyes. The smell of coffee drifted from downstairs, sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. For one blissful moment, I thought my prayers had been answered. Then I heard it, Alicia humming from the kitchen. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding, the clock on the nightstand reading 7:15 a.m. Impossible. I scrambled out of bed, nearly falling in my haste to get downstairs, and there she was, Alicia, alive and well, standing at the stove in my old college t-shirt, flipping pancakes. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, glancing over her shoulder at me. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep through your alarm." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This was impossible. "Marcus?" Alicia's smile faded, replaced by concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I crossed the kitchen in 2 slides, pulling her into my arms so tightly that she let out a surprised oof. "Whoa, what's gotten into you?" she laughed, returning the hug. "Bad dream," I managed to choke out, burying my face in her hair. breathing in her familiar scent. A really, really bad dream. Alicia pulled back, cupping my face in her hands. Well, you're awake now. Everything's fine, okay? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, because suddenly I remembered I'd lived this before. Yesterday morning. The morning Alicia died. As we ate our breakfast, my mind raced. Had it all been a dream? Some kind of stress-induced hallucination? It had felt so real, so visceral, but here was Alicia, alive and well, talking about her parent-teacher conference as if nothing had happened. I tried to shake it off, the lingering dread, as Alicia gathered her things to leave, but as she reached for her car keys, panic seized me. Wait, don't drive today, please, I blurted out, grabbing her wrist. She frowned. What? Why not? I scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't make me sound insane. I have a bad feeling. Can you carpool with someone, or could I drive you? Marcus, I can't just change my plans at the last minute. I need my car for errands after work, remember? She studied my face, worry creasing my brow. Are you okay? That must have been some nightmare. I forced a smile, trying to appear calm. Yeah, sorry. I'm fine. Just be careful. I love you. I love you too, she replied, still looking concerned. Try not to stress too much about your presentation. You're going to do great. And then she was gone, just like before. I watched her pull out of the driveway, my heart in my throat. I spent the morning in a state of high anxiety, jumping every time my phone rang. But as the hours ticked by with no bad news, I started to relax. Maybe it really had just been a nightmare. My presentation went well, just as it had in my dream, memory. I wasn't sure what to call it anymore, so as I packed up my things afterward, I decided to call Alicia just to put my mind at ease. The phone rang twice, 3 times. Hello? Is this Marcus Thomas? Ice flooded into my veins. Same voice, same words. Mr. Thompson, this is Nurse Reeves from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Alicia. She's been in an accident. No. This couldn't be happening. Not again. What happened? I demanded, even though I already knew the answer. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson. Your wife was brought in about an hour ago. There was an accident at the school where she works. A student parent became violent, and I'm afraid Alicia didn't make it. I'm so sorry for your loss. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But as I raced to the hospital, as I saw Alicia's still form once again, as I held her lifeless hand, I knew it was all too real. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the core that when I woke up tomorrow, it would all begin again. I don't know how many times I've lived this day now. 10, 50, 100, they've all blurred together in a nightmarish haze of grief and desperation. Each morning, I wake up at 7:15 a.m. Each morning, I rush downstairs to find Alicia alive, humming in the kitchen. Each evening, no matter what I do, I receive that dreaded phone call. I've tried everything I can think of. I've begged her to stay home. I've faked an illness, a family emergency. I've disconnected her car battery. I've slashed her tires. I've hidden her keys. I've called the school with bomb threats. I've tried to get it shut down for the day. Nothing works. If Alicia stays home, she dies in a house fire. If she can't drive, she takes the bus, which crashes. If the school closes, she goes to run errands instead and gets caught in a store robbery gone wrong. It's like the universe itself is conspiring to take her from me, over and over and over again. Today I decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to keep Alicia home or safe, I'll stay with her all day. Maybe from there I can protect her. When she leaves for work, I follow in my car. She notices, of course, pulling over after a few blocks. "Marcus, what are you doing?" she asks, as I approach her window, her voice a mix of confusion and concern. I need to be with you today, I say, knowing how crazy that must sound. Please, Alicia, trust me. It's important. She studies my face for a long moment and then sighs. Okay, get in, but you're explaining on the way. As we drive, I try to tell her the truth about the time loop, about her dying every day, about my desperate attempt to save her. Alicia listens silently, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, she says, Marcus, I think you need help. This isn't normal. Maybe we should go to the hospital instead of work. No, I said, making her jump. No hospitals. Please, Alicia, just let me stay with you today. If nothing happens, I promise I'll get help tomorrow. She agrees, reluctantly. We spend the day together at her school. I hover anxiously, scanning for threats, jumping at every sudden noise. Alicia's colleagues give us odd looks, but she makes excuses about a family situation. As the final bell rings, I begin to hope maybe this time it'll work out. Maybe I've finally broken the cycle. We're walking to her car when I hear the screech of tires. I turn to see a car careening towards us, the driver slumped over the wheel. Time slows. I reach for her, trying to pull Alicia out of the way, but I'm too slow. Always too slow. The impact throws us both. I hit the ground hard, my vision blurring. When it clears, I see her lying motionless a few feet away, a growing pool of blood beneath her. No, I whisper, crawling towards her. No, not again, please, not again. But it's too late. By the time the ambulance arrives, she's gone. I'm left once more with the certainty that tomorrow it'll begin again. The next day, I don't even get out of bed. What's the point? Nothing I do makes a difference. Alicia always dies, and I'm left alone with the grief. I hear her calling from downstairs, concern in her voice, but I can't face her. I can't watch her die again. Eventually, she comes up to check on me. Marcus, are you okay? I roll over, burying my face in the pillow. Go away, Alicia, please. The bed dips as she sits beside me, her hands gentle on my back. What's wrong? Talk to me. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. So I do. I tell her everything, my voice muffled by the pillow, about the time loop, about watching her die over and over, about the failed attempts to save her. When I finish, silence stretches between us. Then Alicia speaks, her voice trembling slightly. I don't understand what's happening, Marcus, but I believe that you believe it. And I'm here. Whatever this is, we'll face it together. I roll over, meeting her eyes. The love and concern I see there breaks something inside me. I pull her into my arms, holding her tight as sobs rack my body. We spend the day at home, talking, crying, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. As evening approaches, I grow increasingly anxious. Maybe it'll be different this time, she says, squeezing my hand. Maybe staying home was the answer. I want to believe her, but as the clock ticks towards the dreaded hour, a sense of the inevitable settles over me. At 4:17, exactly when the call usually comes in, there's a knock on the door instead. Alicia moves to answer it, but I hold her back. No, let me. I open the door to find two solemn-faced police officers. Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid we have some bad news. There's been an accident. I don't hear them, because behind them on the street I see a familiar figure, a man in a dark suit watching us. As our eyes meet, he smiles, a cold, cruel expression that chills me to the core. Then he turns and walks away, vanishing into thin air. I slam the door shut, my mind reeling. Who was that? What did it mean? But there's no time to ponder, because Alicia's on the floor, clutching her chest, gasping for air. Heart attack. That's what the paramedics say when they arrive. Nothing anyone could have done. As I watch them take Alicia's body away, that strange man's smile haunts me. For the first time, I wonder if there's more to this nightmare than I realize. The next morning, I wake up with a new determination. If I can't save Alicia, and God, it kills me to even think that, maybe I can at least find out why this is happening. I go through the motions of the morning, hugging Alicia tightly before she leaves. Then I set out to find the man in the suit. I drive around town, watching for him. Hours pass with no sign. As 4:17 approaches, I find myself near the park where Alicia and I had our first date. There he is, sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. I approach cautiously, my heart pounding. Who are you? Why are you doing this to me? He looks up, the same cold smile on his face. Ha, Marcus, I was wondering when you'd find me. You know my name? I know everything about you, Marcus. And Alicia. A chill runs down my spine. Are you... what? Are you God? The devil? The man's laughter rings out, harsh and mocking. Nothing so grand, I'm afraid. Think of me as an interested observer. Observer of what? I asked, my fist clenched at my side. He stands, brushing breadcrumbs off of his suit. Of you, Marcus. Of your pain, your grief, your desperation. It's all quite fascinating, really. Rage boils up inside me. I lunge at him, intent on wiping that smug smile off his face. But my hands pass right through him, like he's made of smoke. Now, none of that. We're just getting to know each other. Why? Why are you doing this? The man's smile fades, replaced by a look of cold curiosity. Why? Because I can. Because your suffering amuses me. Because I want to see how long it takes to break you completely. His words hit me like a physical blow. I stagger back, shaking my head in denial. No, this can't be real. You can't be real. Oh, I'm very real, Marcus. And this is very, very real. For you, at least. My phone rings. 4:17 p.m. I already know what I'm going to hear when I answer it. The man in the suit watches me, his head tilted in interest. Well, aren't you going to get that? I'm sure it's important news about dear Alicia. I want to run, I want to scream, I want to wake up from this nightmare, but I'm rooted to the spot, trapped in this moment of horror. As I raise the phone to my ear, the man in the suit begins to fade away. But his parting words echo in my mind long after he's gone. Sweet dreams, Marcus. I'll see you tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. The revelation of the man in the suit haunts me. Each day as I wake to the sound of morning routine, I'm torn between my desperate need to save Alicia and my burning desire to understand, to defeat this cruel entity that's toying with our lives. Today I decide to ignore him completely. I focus all my energy on Alicia, determined to find some way, any way, to break the cycle. Let's run away, I blurt out over breakfast. Alicia pauses, fork halfway to her mouth. What? Let's just go, right now. Get in the car and drive until we can't anymore. She studies my face, concern etching lines around her eyes. Marcus, what's going on? You've been acting strange for days now. I take her hand, willing her to understand. Please, Alicia, trust me. We need to leave, now. Maybe it's the desperation in my voice, or maybe it's the love that's carried us through 7 years of marriage. Whatever the reason, Alicia nods. Okay, well, let's go. We throw some clothes in a bag and hit the road. As we drive out of town, I keep glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man in the suit following us. but the highway behind us remains clear. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, I begin to hope. We drive for hours, putting miles between us and the town where Alicia has died 100 times. We laugh, we sing along to the radio, we reminisce about old road trips. As the sun begins to set, we pull into a small coastal town. "Let's stay here tonight," Alicia suggests, pointing to a quaint little bed and breakfast. I check my watch. It's 6:43. We made it past 4:17, past the time Alicia always dies. "We did it," I whisper, tears prickling in my eyes. "We really did it." Alicia squeezes my hand. "Did what, babe?" Before I can answer, a commotion down the street catches my attention. A crowd is gathered, pointing at something in the sky. "Is that a plane?" someone shouts. "It's flying awfully low." My blood runs cold. No, it can't be. The roar of engines fill the air. I grab Alicia, trying to pull her to safety, but it's too late. The plane crashes into the bed and breakfast in a deafening explosion of fire and debris. In the chaos that follows, the screaming, the sirens, the frantic attempts at rescue, I search desperately for my wife. Deep down, I already know. As I stand there, watching the firefighters battle the blaze, I feel a presence beside me. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" the man in the suit asks, his tone conversational. "That you could outrun fate?" I don't look at him. I can't look at him. Why? Why her? Why us? He shrugs, the moment visible from the corner of my eye. "Why not? Your pain is exquisite. Your love, your desperation, your growing madness, it's all so deliciously human. I'll stop you. Somehow, I'll find a way." His laughter's like broken glass. "Oh, Marcus, I do hope you try. It'll make this game so much more interesting." I wake up the next morning with a new plan. If I can't save Alicia by changing her fate, maybe I can save her by changing mine. I go through the motions of our morning routine one last time, savoring every moment with her. As she leaves for work, I kiss her deeply. "I love you," I say. "Always remember that." She smiles, a little puzzled. "I love you too. You sure you're okay?" I nod, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Have a great day, babe." As soon as she's gone, I start gathering supplies. Rope, a chair, a notepad. I write Alicia a letter, pouring out everything, the time loop, the deaths, the man in the suit. I tell her how much I love her, how sorry I am I couldn't save her. I beg her to live a full, happy life. Then I prepare the noose. Just before 4:17, I position myself on the chair. My plan is simple. If I die first, maybe the loop will break. Maybe Alicia will live. As I stand there, heart pounding, the man in the suit appears. My, this is certainly a new approach. "Go to hell." "You first," he smiles, cold and cruel. I take a deep breath, close my eyes, and step off the chair. The rope pulls tight, and I wake up gasping, back in bed. 7:15 a.m., another failed attempt. But something's different this time. There's no smell of coffee, no sound of Alicia humming downstairs. I rush to the kitchen, my heart in my throat. It's empty. It's cold. "Alicia!" I call out, panic rising. "Alicia, where are you?" "She's not here, Marcus," a familiar voice says from behind me. I whirl to find the man in the suit lounging in my armchair, looking utterly at ease. "What did you do? Where is she?" He examines his nails, the picture of casual indifference. "I didn't do anything. You did." "What are you talking about?" He sighs, as if explaining to a particularly slow child. "You changed the rules, Marcus. You died first. So now, she never existed." The world spins around me. I grab the counter to keep from falling. No, bring her back, please. I can't bring back someone who was never born, he says, standing. But don't worry. I'm sure we can find a new way to continue our little game. As the truth of what I'd done sinks in, I slid to the floor, a scream of anguish tearing up my throat. The man in the suit watches, a small, satisfied smile on his face. Well, shall we begin again? He asks, straightening his jacket. The world fades to black, and I brace myself for whatever fresh hell awaits. 'Cause now I know the truth. There's no escape, no way to win, just an eternity of loss and pain, and the cruel smile of the man in the suit. But as consciousness returns, something feels off. The bed beneath me is harder than usual. The air smells different, antiseptic, sterile. I open my eyes to find myself in a hospital room. Machines beep steadily around me, and there, holding my hand, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, is Alicia. Oh my God, Marcus, can you hear me? I try to speak, but my throat is dry, raw. Alicia holds a cup of water to my lips. What happened? You've been in a coma for 3 months. There was an accident on your way to work. The doctors, they weren't sure you'd ever wake up. My mind reels. A coma? Was it all a dream? The time loops, the deaths, the man in the suit? As if summoned by my thoughts, I see a flicker of movement by the door. The man in the suit stands there, watching. But this time, his smile doesn't seem cruel. It's almost approving. He nods once, then vanishes. Marcus, are you okay? Alicia asks, her voice pulling me back. Should I call the doctor? I look at her, really look at her. My beautiful, vibrant, alive wife. Whatever happened, whatever was real or not real, none of it matters now. I'm okay. Everything is okay, I say, squeezing her hand. As Alicia calls the doctor, I close my eyes, savoring the feeling of her hand in mine. I don't know if I've won, lost, or simply been released from some cosmic game, but I do know one thing. I'll never take a single moment with Alicia for granted again.
Seems we're almost done with our little lunch special. However, let's have another little bit of sweet before we go to our main course. Unless you're afraid you'll discover that you are the unfortunate cookie.
The usual lunch special, Charles? Yeah, Damien, but no crab rangoon this time. Trying not to eat so many carbs. Whatever you say, dude, Damien said, ringing him up. To say that Charles ate a lot of Chinese food probably wouldn't put his problem in perspective. Charles had been lucky when the pandemic hit. He was a work-from-home computer tech who rarely left his house anyway, so working on projects from his apartment was pretty par for the course. He'd been getting lunch at Damien's for the better part of 8 years, and they had the best Chinese food within walking distance of his bungalow. Though COVID had put an end to him dining in, it hadn't stopped Charles from getting his fix. Quite the contrary, it had only made it worse. Charles ordered from Damien's 3 times a day. Breakfast was egg drop soup and early morning rice at 10. Lunch was General Tso chicken, around 2 o'clock. Dinner was beef and broccoli with house soup and salad at 10, and was also the last delivery that Damien's made for the day. Charles honestly couldn't remember the last time he had cooked a meal for himself, and it just seemed easier to buy takeout. His programming job paid way more than he needed, especially after a lot of his coworkers had quit, and Charles was enjoying his shut-in lifestyle. When he heard the knock on his door, he rolled away from his keyboard and went to get his lunch. It was the short, dark-haired guy this time, the one who looked a little like Bruce Wayne. He didn't speak a lot of English, and Charles told him thanks as he took his food inside. Damien's only had about 3 delivery guys. The nerdy Bruce Wayne was the one who delivered most often. Charles had been hoping it would be Roger, though, the brown-haired Chad who liked to talk about Warhammer. But it appeared he'd have to wait till dinner time to see how he'd placed in last week's tournament. As a shut-in, Charles often had to live vicariously through those who braved the outside world. As Charles looked through the bag, ensuring everything was in there, he smiled as he saw his favorite part of the meal towards the bottom. It was silly, but Charles found that he really looked forward to those buttery yellow little cookies with the fortunes inside. He knew they were far from authentic cuisine, but he liked the cookies ever since he was a kid. Charles had about 100 of the fortunes pinned up on a corkboard, and sometimes he liked to read them and think about their meanings on days he'd gotten them. Had he found someone new when he got that fortune? Had he found untold fortune on that particular day? Looking at them so often was probably why he had noticed the phone number. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. He had never really thought about it before. It was probably the number for the restaurant to resupply their fortune cookies. The fact that it appeared on the fortunes, something that were inside the cookies, was a little strange. How would the restaurant get the number if they handed out the cookies? It didn't really make sense for the people eating the cookies to need more cookies. And as Charles sat the food on his desk, he opened the cookie and fished out the fortune as he munched on the little cookie shell. Today, you will make a hasty decision that will change your life. Damn, Charles thought, that one was different. It seemed benign on the surface. Everyone made decisions that changed their life, didn't they? The message wasn't the weird part, though. It was the sinister undertones that Charles couldn't quite shake. Not just any decision, but a hasty one. He ate the other half of the cookie before adding this one to the corkboard, looking at the phone number that sat under the lucky numbers. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. Charles grinned, turning back to his desk as he opened the rest of his food and began to eat. Who wouldn't want more cookies? Charles worked well into the night. By 11, he had fixed the problem in the code his boss had sent him. One of the other coders had been a little sloppy in the parameters, and as a result had caused the program to crash as often as it returned anything usable. Charles had fixed it, emailing his boss about 10, and had started bumming around on Reddit as he thought about what to do with the rest of his evening. He wasn't ready to turn in yet, but he wasn't really interested in any of the games he had in his Steam library. He was just kind of wasting time as he scrolled through Reddit when he came to a weird post about strange phone numbers. The poster was talking about how he had called a number he'd found and how the guitar instructor had turned out to be a real creep. They claimed he had later seen the man on America's Most Wanted, but Charles thought the last bit sounded like bullshit. The comments mostly agreed, but some of them had talked about other weird numbers they had called. Massage parlors that had turned out to be brothels, contractors that had later robbed the house they had renovated, weird number stations that called back when you hung up, everything in between. The more he read, the more Charles thought about the number on the fortune cookie. It couldn't hurt to call. Maybe it would even give him a cool story to tell to strangers on the internet. He walked over to the board, cell phone clutched in hand, as he read that old familiar legend again. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. Charles dialed the number in that stilted way that people do when they dial a new number. He had to go back and try it again after putting the number in wrong the first time, and when it started ringing, Charles assumed that a machine would get it. They would probably just bury him in a phone tree, and he would never actually talk to a real person. Either that, or the number would ring twice and then tell him it had been disconnected. They had probably had these cookies out for a while, and the number would have changed or been liquidated altogether. The third ring had barely started when a bored-sounding woman picked up the phone. Hello? Charles blinked, and the woman had said hello once more before he finally shook it off and answered her. Yeah, I was calling about the cookies. Wonderful. We'll send them right out. Don't you need my address or my... No, sir, it's all taken care of. Thank you for your call. Then she hung up, and Charles was left staring out into space. Well, that had been weird, he thought. He figured it might be time to get ready for bed. The phone call had weirded him out, and he had another long day tomorrow. As he snugged down under his covers, he couldn't help but glance over at the fortunes on the corkboard. He wondered how long it would take them to send the cookies to his house. Would they send them all at once, or would this be a situation where they sent a few at a time? He fell asleep dreaming of the buttery little fortune cookies, and when he woke up, he decided that he must still be dreaming. His hands wrapped around the plastic film of a single fortune cookie, and as he opened it, he could smell the flaky aroma of the pastry inside. When he broke it open and felt the crumbs fall onto his chest, he opened his eyes and realized that it was no dream. The fortune cookie was tucked under his pillow, as if the tooth fairy had left him a buttery treat instead of a quarter. Charles looked at the fortune as he ate and was surprised to find not a fortune, but a thank you note. Thank you for your business. That was when he remembered the phone call from the night before. It was weird, but he couldn't see how the two could be connected. He must have just imagined eating the fortune cookie last night. Charles had no idea how it had gotten in his bed, but it was a nice surprise, nonetheless. He put in a call to Damien's, and when he sat down on the couch, the phone ringing as someone no doubt ran to grab it, he heard the crinkle of cellophane from under the couch cushions. Reaching under the cushion, Charles found another wrapped cookie, this one slightly broken from being sat on. "Hello? Charles, you ordering?" Damien's voice brought Charles back to reality, and he munched on the cookie as he placed his morning order. He was soon eating his breakfast, the cookie out of his mind, but he would think back on that day and decide that that had been the first appearance of the strange cookies. The next day, Charles found 12 individually wrapped cookies. They were all scattered around the apartment. They were tossed haphazardly around, some under the couch, some as far as the kitchenette. Charles couldn't exactly put them off as something he'd forgotten or misplaced. How had they gotten so spread across the living room? Then his eyes fell on a small takeout bag in the trash, and he felt like he knew the answer. Roger had delivered his food this morning, and he remembered telling him about the number he'd called to get more cookies. Roger had said it sounded a little spooky, and told him to let him know when the cookies arrived. Charles had gone to get his wallet so he could pay him, leaving Roger at the door. That must have been when he'd tossed the cookies into his house, probably thinking he was being funny. Charles nodded as he collected up the cookies, the explanation reassuring him until he remembered that it was almost time for dinner. Roger had delivered his food around 11, so how did Charles not notice the cookies for 8 hours? He put it out of his mind as he picked up the phone so he could order his dinner. The next day, Charles found 20 of the cookies scattered around his house again. Not all at once, of course. Charles had sat down to eat his breakfast when he found the first one under the couch. Then he stumbled across the line of 10 or 12 cookies stretched over the couch and to the far side of the kitchenette. They looked tossed haphazardly, and he gritted his teeth as he imagined Roger smirking as he covertly threw a handful of cookies into the apartment. He picked up one of the cookies, preparing to call Damien's and tell Roger how he'd gotten him good, when he remembered that Roger hadn't delivered his meal this morning. Roger wouldn't be there till noon today, and the other guy hadn't even known about the number. But if it wasn't Roger, then who else could it be? He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he found 4 more in the bathroom sink and 3 more in his bedroom, it was harder to overlook. He found more in the bathtub, but by then any thought that it might be a joke was over. None of the delivery guys could have gotten this far into his apartment. He was more confused than scared, but Charles really wanted some answers. When he called to place his lunch order, he was surprised to find Damienn answering the phone again. Surprised, but not unhappy. "The usual?" Damienn asked, and Charles could already hear his pencil scratching. "Yeah, but I got a question." "We don't do discounts for frequent customers," Damienn joked, but he must have heard something he didn't like in Charles's voice. "No, nothing like that. I was wondering about where you get your fortune cookies from." "My uncle orders them. Why do you ask?" "Well, I've recently started finding them around my house. It was just a few yesterday, but they were all over the house today. I found 20 of them so far, and the fact that no one's been in my house since right after COVID started is a little..." But Damienn cut him off. The usual good-natured ribbing was gone. Charles believed that this was the most serious he'd ever heard Damienn. "You called the numbers on the cookies, didn't you?" Charles' mouth went dry as he heard Damienn get to the point. "Yeah, but I haven't gotten any cookies delivered. They just keep appearing in my house. I don't understand how this is happening, but I want to know how they're getting in." He was silent for a few seconds, and Charles thought he had hung up. When he spoke, Charles suddenly wished he had. You can't stop it. There's no taking it back once the deal is made. He hung up on Charles then, and they refused to take his calls. Charles was on his own, it seemed. On the third day, Charles found his couch covered in cookies, and he estimated there were about 50 in all. That was when Charles called the police. They came out and checked the house, but they couldn't find any sign of entry. Charles showed them the cookies, telling them how they had just appeared in the middle of the night, but he could tell they didn't believe him. They thought he was playing a joke, one at their expense, too, and they clearly didn't appreciate it. They told him they would look into it and to call back if it happened again, but Charles figured they would be another group that would ignore his phone calls. He tried to call Damien again, but no one picked up. He locked all the doors before bed, ensuring every window was secured, and checked every point of entry. He had told himself the night before that if it kept happening, he would get the landlord to change the locks. How else could they be getting in? This had to be a trick. Someone had too much time and they wanted to play a trick on him. Whether they were pranksters or not, Charles wanted this to stop. Charles lay on the couch, all the cookies swept into a pile in the corner, and hoped they would just be gone when he woke up in the morning. He awoke to find the floor of his apartment covered in the little yellow cookies. They crackled angrily as he set his feet down on them, and when he stood up, they were up to his ankles. As he trudged through them, he saw they covered the floor from the living room to the bedroom. The bathroom door opened with some pushing, and as he waded through them so he could use the toilet, Charles was racked with a sudden wave of angry coughs. He felt something tickle at the back of his throat, and was certain for half a second that he was going to throw up. His urine trickled to the floor as he hit his knees, and when the thing splashed into the toilet, Charles felt something cold squirm in his guts. The cookie floated in the filthy water like a strange buoy in an alien sea. As he watched it bob there, Charles made a decision that would change the rest of his short life. He slid his shoes on and left the house for the first time in months. The bell rang as he walked into Damien's, and the staff's smiling faces curdled as they saw him. Charles sat at the table he had taken every time he had eaten here. The staff went about their jobs, actively avoiding him, but Charles wasn't going anywhere. He knew that Damien had answers. He knew something, and he'd sit here until he got what he was after. Even if it was Damien telling him how exquisitely screwed he was going to get some answers. Damien let him sit there for close to an hour, before finally coming out. "I told you there was nothing I could do. You've been cursed. Don't you understand that? The least you could do is not spread it around." "You know something about this, though," Charles said, glaring at him from between his steepled fingers, "and I'm not leaving until I get some answers." Damien turned his head away, seeming to think about it before finally telling Charles to wait. "Without you calling in an order at 10, I can finally close this place up on time. Wait till then, order whatever you want, and I'll take you to someone who has answers." Charles scoffed. "I can't just sit here all day." Damien only shrugged. "If you want answers, then I guess you'll have to." With little choice but to wait, Charles ordered some lunch. The staff kept his drink full, and Damien was true to his word. Charles ate when he was hungry, drank when he was thirsty, and used their facilities sparingly. He couldn't help but imagine his poor apartment as it filled up with the buttery little cookies, and the longer he sat, the more anxious he became. Where was Damien taking him later? Who would explain the situation? Someone else who had called the number? As the sun set behind him, Charles wanted to go with him less and less, but knew that he needed to more and more. As the crowds faded and the restaurant emptied, Damien finally came out and told him it was time to go. "We can take my car," he said, indicating a small hatchback out front. The car ride was short. They drove a few streets towards a small cluster of family homes that ended in a cul-de-sac. Charles could see several people wave at Damien as he drove towards the house at the end of the turnabout, and the sight of that place made him a little wary. Where the others had well-maintained lawns and houses that looked well-kept, this house they stopped in front of looked old and ready to fall down. The grass was mostly sand, patchy and limp, and the front porch was covered in boxes that looked ready to be shipped. The place looked abandoned, like a hoarder's house, but Charles could see people coming and going through the front door, most of them carrying boxes like the one on the porch. Damien killed the engine and looked at Charles. "You sure you want to know? It won't change your fate." Charles nodded, unable to damn himself with his words, and Damien climbed out and set off towards the house. Charles followed meekly enough after, but it wasn't until he got to the porch that he realized what those boxes were. He didn't need to read the foreign characters to know what was inside. The open box contained a bunch of familiar yellow cookies that Charles had come to hate. Whoever owned this house was packaging the fortune cookies in boxes. When Damien opened the door, a cascade of wrapped fortune cookies slithered onto the porch. "It's even worse than usual," Damien mumbled, wading into the sea of cookies as he beckoned Charles forward. The inside was even worse. The house was full of boxes, and the pair had to wade through the hip-deep sea of fortune cookies. Charles could see others wading through them, shoving them into boxes as they took them out. Charles could see a kitchen and a den as they waded through the house, and Damien seemed to be leading him towards the back. As they made their way down a hallway towards the back bedroom, the cookies got thicker and thicker. Damien knocked on the door, calling out a name Charles didn't understand. "Uncle?" Damien asked, a strange gurgling coming from inside. "Uncle, I got a guest who wants to meet you. May we come in?" There was another gurgling response, and Damien invited Charles inside. Charles was surprised to find not a room full of cookies, but a neat and tidy bedroom. Inside was an elderly man in striped pajamas, his dark hair plastered against his skull, and his unreadable eyes floating dully in his wrinkled face. His sallow skin clung to his bones like a bleached corpse, and if he hadn't turned to acknowledge Damien, Charles would have thought he was dead. "Good to see you again, Uncle," Damien greeted him. "This is my uncle, Dallin. He once owned the restaurant that I own now, but he made a miscalculation. He was trying to cut costs, and when he saw that he could get more cookies by calling the number, he gave it a try. At first it was wonderful. Dallin had enough cookies to stock the store for months, and he was glad for the windfall. Soon the cookies started taking over his house, though. They covered the floors, they crept up to the ceiling, they spilled into the yard, and finally they started filling him, too." The words sent a chill through Charles, but he had to be sure of what he was hearing. "When you say they filled him, what do you—" Dallin coughed suddenly, deeply, a racking cough that shook his whole body. Charles took a step towards the sick man, but Damien put a hand out to stop him. The old man crossed his arms over his chest, trying to steady himself, and bent low over the comforter. As the coughs became thick, Charles thought the old man meant to bring something up. Then he lunged forward suddenly. Charles watched as a cascade of cellophane-wrapped cookies fell onto the bedspread. He began to tremble, just like the one he had brought up earlier that day. "So," Charles said, having to swallow a mouthful of spit, not having the moisture to speak more than a few words. "So I'll start doing that too?" Damien nodded, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'll have some of my people come over to pick up the cookies they leave behind. We can pay you for them, hopefully making it a little easier for you. Eventually we can bring you here. You can live in comfort for however long you have left, but eventually you'll be no different than my uncle here." Charles stood for a minute, unable to come to terms with what he was seeing. He wanted to deny what Damien had said. He wanted to tell him how it just couldn't be real. But then his body was consumed with vicious coughs, as if to prove how real it was. A single cookie pattered to the floor at his feet, and Charles realized it was already too late.
One more story for you. Well, one more course for you. And I think we've got a pretty good one to go out on. It's a two-parter, and I think it's definitely worth the wait for a savory yet fulfilling tale. Written by Bogleach. It's a story about a man who just wants a little something to eat and discovers more than he bargained for. So, let's hear a story about Burger.
I don't know if any of this is going to get through to anyone. If it does, it's probably because they want it to, in which case, I'm really sorry. Maybe they just don't even care. Maybe it doesn't matter because there's nothing we can do. If you're anything like me, you've seen some weird stuff around town. And more importantly, you've realized it. And you've remembered it while everyone else goes about their day in ignorant bliss. I don't know how far it goes, but so far, nobody has shown any capacity to register what I'm saying. I can spam it up and down the internet, and I don't get any relevant responses. I've considered that I might be crazy, but even crazy people can get some sort of reaction. Someone will at least try to humor them, calm them down. I've tried doctors, police, professors. They all just stare off into space when I start to describe this thing, like something is actively blocking the exchange of information. My biggest fear isn't that I'm all alone.
My biggest fear is that I might still only perceive bits and pieces of something bigger, or worse, that my capacity to perceive all this is shrinking. I can write it down, I can record every last detail, but it's not going to matter if I become like everyone else. I could wake up tomorrow and look at my journal entries and only see a pile of mysterious cake recipes. Who the hell knows? First thing I ever saw was one of the pickup windows. It's just like any other you might see at a fast food place, but it was right on the side of my own damn house. Nothing amiss indoors, but outside, half the block was lined up on my front lawn, reading over a glowing menu full of scribbly-looking gibberish and receiving their meals, if that's what you want to call them. They all act like it was their usual mundane lunch stop, even while the mail lady sucked some rancid-looking glop out of a plastic pouch, congealed blood dribbling down her chin. She told me it was the best she'd ever had. All my questions were met with those blank stares and stupid smiles. I couldn't tell who or what was actually handing out the food, or where it was even coming from. I could only see blackness. At least, that's how I remember it. Maybe I saw something else, but it's gone now. God, it was only the beginning. All the restaurants in town, the real ones anyway, are typically deserted. Employees still show up, some of them, but they don't even realize that no customers are stopping in. Some of them even host new windows, parasitically siphoning off their business. The things seem to multiply constantly. I've seen them indoors, outdoors, on houses, on trucks. Hell, even one on a tree. A window to nowhere. On a tree. Dispensing deep-fried slop to an ignorant gaggle of hikers. Near as I can tell, all the products are meat, or some vague semblance thereof. I can't always tell what kind of animal, or even what kind of body part is used. I've seen things that could have been dredged from some black, godless deep-sea trench, gelatinous slabs of flesh and blindingly unnatural colors, fried bugs just slightly larger than any I thought existed. It isn't just the windows either. I've started seeing this stuff right on the supermarket shelves. Foreign-looking packaging that has some kind of gibberish language on it. Occasionally bouts of quasi-English like number a million taste or it can dream a great flavor. It all has the same stupid logo on it too, sometimes burnt right into the cuts of meat. A bug-eyed cartoon hamburger and a little chef's hat. Sometimes it's winking, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it only is after I've looked away. There's even people sucking down the stuff on live TV. The talking heads come back from a commercial, licking blood and grease off their hands. The weather lady shows up looking like an extra from a slasher movie, red stains increasingly thick on her blouse. I don't think she's changed in weeks. Nobody even cares. Nobody thinks anything is odd or new or different. Nobody except me. My appetite for meat is thoroughly dead, to say the least. I don't think I could ever trust it again. But I've noticed non-meat products are growing steadily rare. Fruits and vegetables are sitting out longer between restocks. A lot of things are getting phased out to make room for all the new items. I shouldn't have to say this if you could already read and comprehend this far, but for the love of God, don't eat it. Don't taste it. Don't touch it. Try not to even smell it. The more people eat, the less they act like themselves. The funnier they talk. If you know something's up, but you can't see what I'm seeing, I advise you to stick to cereal. I haven't found anything fishy about any of the cereal yet. I can't begin to postulate what's behind this all. Aliens, terrorists, Illuminati, reptoids. I can't believe. I don't know. I could believe anything at this point. Entry 2. The ads are everywhere. Flyers, neon signs, billboards, all of them written in some weird foreign language I can't even find a match for. Plastered with that goofy artwork of the bug-eyed hot dogs and the steaks and the less identifiable things. People stop and stare at them compulsively, pupils dilating with their clouded minds registering God only knows what. A lot of people say the same exact things in the same exact tone and rhyme every single time. That sounds good enough to eat. I hear it hundreds of times a day when I risk going out. Then they'll head straight to one of those impossible windows, the infected supermarket, the rapidly multiplying vending machines, or one of those green doors. Those awful green doors. I don't know if they're actually new or I'm just newly capable of seeing them. The first one I noticed had grown, for lack of a better word, on the back wall of my local ShopRite. An ugly, faded seafoam affair. Smeared windows like a burger logo. Chrome handles flecked with rust. Same as all the others I've seen since. People were coming and going at a steady pace, but even when I staked it out for a good 6 hours, I never saw the same patrons come back out again. I guess that should have been a big warning sign, but I couldn't take it. I had to know. It didn't lead into the store, of course. I knew it wouldn't. As soon as I stepped inside, I was assaulted by the sounds of eating, feasting, wet, breathy chewing sounds, drowning out everything else, tugging at my gag reflex. There were bars, tables, booths scattered in disorganized patterns around rows and rows of buffets. Many seats were occupied, but the bulk of the customers were eating on foot, wolfing it down right out of the bars as they went along. I knew none of them could comprehend what they were really doing, where they really were. The decor was almost, but not quite, in the style of a retro 50s diner, maybe with a dash of Dr. Seuss. A lot of furniture looked chunky, soft, plastic, like they were designed for children, though I can't imagine any child with such depressing tastes. Booths were lined with putrid off-green cushions. Tables were a hideous yellow tan with chipped chrome trimming. Floors were pale blue tiles, like a public restroom, many pieces missing or disheveled. The walls were more of that tacky chrome, interrupted by fake wood paneling, giving way to plastic windows from about waist height to the ceiling. Yes, windows, not visible from the outside. I'd stepped through a door in the middle of one plain, solid brick building, but from inside it was glass all around. They were so thick with grime that I could barely see through them, but I could tell it wasn't the correct view from beyond the ShopRite. It looked more like some murky storybook vista, simple blocky houses on rolling green hills. Despite the steady stream of people coming in through the doors, I couldn't see a single sign of movement or life out there. I began to wonder if I might look suspicious, just standing around and gawking, while everyone else was heading straight for the food. Thought I might as well make some effort to blend in. That was mistake number one. Most of the offerings were typical of the stuff coming out of the takeout windows or invading the grocery store shelves, a heap of raw red steaks set on a bed of black clotted blood, oversized pasty white drumsticks dribbling cold yellow juices, a long trough of chunky pinkish slop jiggled like pudding, as people scooped it onto their trays or just pushed it straight into their grease-caked faces. I think I pulled my shirt up over my nose around that point. I thought I recognized a lot of exotic fare. Frog's legs, chicken feet, beef tips, but I couldn't quite be certain. I wasn't sure if chicken had that many toes, or any frog I knew grew exactly that large. There was a tray of what I thought were fat, segmented seed pods, till one of them abruptly curled and unfurled twice, like a beckoning finger. Made my skin crawl. There were tongues. There were brains. There was something like clear yellow spaghetti and a pasty brown sauce. At least that's what I'm going to keep telling myself it was. There were fish fins and goat eyes and even bones, just steaming hot, perfectly bare white bones. I could barely take the sight of everyone eating. Mrs. Faber, a grim and crotchety old bag from down the street, was digging like an excited child through a big heap of what looked like horse teeth, sucking off whatever scraps of gum tissue she could find. I felt my stomach shudder. We made eye contact, and for a moment I almost thought I saw a look of horrified clarity, like a fog was lifted from her mind, and she was just about to ask me what in God's name she was doing. Instead, her eyes glazed over, and she smiled, that chillingly idiotic smile. "Just like Mama used to make," she said in a hokey sing-song tone that she'd never have been caught dead using, popping another gnarled yellow molar into her mouth and sucking noisily. I could taste my own bile by the time I backed away from that godless orgy of culinary depravity. That's when I saw it. The thing I've come to think of as an egghead. It was wobbling around the bars, arms flailing blindly, a chalk-white, naked, sexless human form dominated by a featureless beach ball of a head, a stick figure made of flesh. The alien invasion theory was already sounding better and better. The thing was working its way down one aisle at a time, and didn't look at first like it had any particular goal in mind. It occasionally clutched at someone's hair or clothing, almost as though desperate for attention or even in need of help, but nobody so much as blinked in its direction. I assumed I could get away with ignoring it like everyone else until it finally hobbled its way down the opposite aisle and crossed my direct line of sight. It froze there, the blank, smooth egg face turning directly towards me. I don't remember the sprint home, but I do remember it was the dead of night when I exploded out of that ugly, greasy green door. Couldn't have been later than noon when I first went in, and I couldn't have been ogling the horrors therein for more than 40 minutes, from my perspective at least. I don't know if anything followed me, but I barricaded myself in my bedroom that night, just to be safe. The doors and the windows are everywhere. If you can read this, only go out when you must. And don't go anywhere new. It might be newer than you think. Entry 3. They used to be people. The eggheads. I've seen it a lot in the week since the buffet. Not everyone shows the signs, but some people, the ones who got hooked the hardest on that sick foreign meat slop, only seem to gain weight from the neck up. Their hair falls out. The first thing to disappear are the eyes, then the mouth seals shut and the whole head smooths over. They start to wander aimlessly, invisible to everyone else, forgotten by friends and loved ones. They do nothing but mumble, groping their arms around like they're hunting for their lost eyes. I killed one today. I'd spent my afternoon scrounging around town for normal things to eat,
an increasingly challenging task. Avoiding the overly weird stuff is only half of it. I have to be careful for anything that boasts a new formula or improved flavor. Sometimes I just have to scan the package for the hamburger logo or check the ingredients for some new gibberish like extracted bone jelly or natural life parts. Some of the untainted stuff is skipping the shelves and going straight into the dumpster, which I've been digging through when the egghead got the jump on me, cornering me in a one-way alley between the Safeway and the Walgreens. Its head was bigger than most, an impossibly bloated globe that almost brushed the walls on both sides. I don't know how its feeble, chalky body could have held it up. It was barely more than a skeleton, thin skin shrink-wrapped tightly to its bones. All that remained of its former identity was a black dress tie, swaying like a pendulum from its pencil-thin neck. Its incoherent mumbling sounded at once panicked, apologetic, and threatening as it staggered towards me, limbs outstretched. I had nothing to defend myself with but a bag of stale bread and a warm can of Coke. I screamed at it, told it I didn't know what it wanted, that there wasn't anything I could do, but it just kept coming, mumbling. The moment my back hit the wall behind me, I snapped. I grabbed the nearest garbage can lid and swung it with all my strength, slamming it straight into that fat, bulbous face like a battle axe. It felt like striking a huge, taunt basketball. A mumbling grew more frantic, more confused as the thing stumbled backwards, gravity tugging at that awkward cranium, arms whirling cartoonishly as it fought to regain its center of balance. It was like some bent slapstick routine, like somebody struggling not to drop a wedding cake. I charged, screaming like a banshee as I struck it again, and the thing finally toppled, slowly, like it was filled with air. As it hit the ground, that massive noggin exploded like a swollen tick. With a wet splash, pinkish gore and hunks of rubbery white flesh gushed out of the alley and onto the street. For one terrified moment, I wondered how the scene would look to the rest of the world, if they'd just see some random senseless act of murder against a completely normal, innocent human being. The people already nonchalantly stepping over the scattered pile of gore would have eased my mind if it weren't for what happened next. One of those piles started moving. Something about the size of a baby came squirming from the pulverized sludge, a fat, slightly oblong shape with a lot of thin, wriggling appendages underneath, still too thick with gore for me to make out details. It was still between me and freedom, and I could only watch in a confused stupor as it unfurled a pair of big, transparent fins and abruptly took flight, buzzing off into the afternoon sky like a bloated, fleshy bumblebee. It, thankfully, never seemed to notice or care about me. Funny how I settled on eggheads. I just thought they looked like eggs. I didn't know they literally were. A woman stopped dead in the crosswalk to smile and wave at the thing as it disappeared into the skyline, then continued on her way with only a momentary look of puzzlement. That "what am I doing" look followed by the "well, whatever" one I've grown so accustomed to over the past several weeks. When I got home, I started reading up on diseases, parasites, bugs, puzzle pieces dropping into place. There's a kind of wasp that lays eggs in a live caterpillar. When the larvae hatch, they modify the host's entire metabolism to suit their needs. Caterpillars eat more, they grow bigger, only to provide the developing wasps with more sustenance. This kind of stuff is everywhere in nature. There are microbes that make mice suicidally attracted to cats. There are flies that grow inside the heads of ants who keep on moving even after their brains are eaten. It all makes so much sense. Maybe they're from space. Maybe they're from hell. Maybe they were always here, topping one species, one civilization after another. Who knows? They feed us so we can feed them, so they have a nice warm body to keep them safe and nourished until they don't need us anymore. We're just a herd of cattle, oblivious to our position in life as we're fattened up and slaughtered by something that looms just above our understanding of the natural order. I don't know why I can see them, why I can see what they're feeding us. I'm like a cow who grasps exactly what goes on in a slaughterhouse, and I can't think about what a cow would ever hope to accomplish with that knowledge. Your guess is as good as mine. Entry 4. Today I followed one of those flying things. They eventually break out of the eggheads on their own after taking 30 minutes or so to wipe the gore off their slimy bodies with their squiggly legs before they take to the air. They're never shown any suggestion or any acknowledgement that I exist. They just flutter away like they've got somewhere to be. Apparently they do. It was in a Walmart parking lot that I witnessed another hatching. The egghead was stumbling between cars, clawing at its own face, reaching feebly out to passersby like it still thought it could be saved. It hadn't even hit the ground before its featureless face started to crack audibly, a pink glob dribbling out like raw yolk. It collapsed against a minivan and slumped limply on the pavement as a big hunk of its scalp popped off with a wet, solid crunch. The thing inside was throbbing, swelling like a pufferfish, trying to push open what was once a human skull. It throbbed and squirmed its way out of the ruptured cranium, looking like nothing so much as a wet, rubbery horsefly made of chewing gum, or an inverted brain with a membranous wing. Its branching limbs writhed like night crawlers, barely supporting its bloated, rugose body. The wings trembled almost cautiously at first before it took its first blind leap into the air and smacked onto the ground. There was a dud. It took another shot at flying, awkwardly bobbing for a few feet before it dropped like a rock with another pitiful wet smack. I laughed. When invincible monsters are devouring the human race and nobody cares, you tend to take whatever entertainment you can get. It took off again in the same direction, landing itself on the hood of a Jeep. The little guy was determined. I'd give him that. That's when it dawned on me. The opportunity I'd stumbled on. They'd always disappeared into the sky before I could even get a sense of their direction, but I could easily tail this one on foot. I figured worst case scenario, I'd see nothing new and have to take a bus back home. As luck would have it, its destination wasn't far. I came close to giving up, waiting for the damn thing to collect itself every 10 to 15 feet, watching it plummet like a bent paper airplane and flounder like a dying fish for minutes at a time. But not an hour had passed before I learned its little secret. Half a mile from the crumpled remains of the egghead was a porta-john. Between the magic door, garish advertisements, mutant snack foods, and odd stuff I couldn't even begin to get into, I'd never stopped to think about the bright blue portable toilets that seemed unusually common as of late. I never needed one, and with the seemingly perpetual road work guzzling our tax dollars for as long as I've lived here, it's not as if they were at all strange to see. The grimy plastic door quietly swung open as the brain bug floated closer. I feigned disinterest, doing my best to pass by as obliviously as everyone else, but snuck a quick glance into the open honeypot. The brain fly, as I decided to call them, was already careening down a long, dark tunnel, stretching as far as the eye could see, all somehow contained in a single, small, portable shithouse. Nothing unusual these days, I guess. As I made my way back to my car and drove the rest of the way home, only one thought persisted. I had to know. Reality was unraveling around me. Former neighbors were fighting in the streets for rancid mouthfuls of fish guts. Giant hamburgers were lighting up the night sky on neon signs that dwarfed entire buildings. Things were eating people from the inside out. And all I really wanted was answers. Even a hint. Any lead that I could find. I didn't suspect there was anything I could do. And any day now I was going to wake up another deluded zombie. Another gluttonous slave to their deep-fried maggots and pickled eyeballs. They could grind me up and serve me at the buffet for all I cared. I just had to know where that damn tunnel went, where the brain-eating bastards were really going. I laid awake that night, my mind racing with images of alien motherships, parallel realities, subterranean cities. Tomorrow I'm going in. Either I die knowing one more piece of the puzzle, or I somehow kick that gooey little thing in the ass. Who's to say they'll even be prepared for an intruder, if they think that we're all being fooled? I don't expect to be some kind of hero, but so far, I'm the only one I know who even has a shot at trying. Entry 5.1. I was not prepared for what I found in that tunnel. It stretched for over a mile in the back of what should have been a 3x3 interior of a porta-potty. I had been led there by the flying brain, and what I found still succeeds in surprising me. I planned to come prepared, but there was ultimately little that I thought would be useful. I packed a store-bought survival kit, ropes and flares and whatnot, and a heavy metal snow shovel, the only weapon I really thought would accomplish anything. The eggheads only ever responded to bludgeoning, and even then they only seemed to speed up the hatching process. No way could I have hit one of those brain flies with a bullet, but in a closed space, I suppose I could give one a good thwack. Besides the fundamental impossibility of its existence, the tunnel was wholly unremarkable. A slightly rounded concrete corridor, interrupted only by a squarish, rusty gate. The distant droning escalated as I progressed, and soon enough, the tunnel gave way to what I suppose I can describe as a factory floor. I don't know how long I spent just standing there slack-jawed, my brain fumbling over itself to process everything that I was seeing. Think of everything that comes to mind when you hear machinery. Turning cogs, conveyor belts, churning pistons, whirling fans, mechanisms of every conceivable design. And then some cranking and pumping away in a space so vast that no floor or ceiling or walls could be seen in the distant darkness. Now, imagine somebody threw all that away and hired clowns to remodel. 50 or 60 years of neglect later, you might have something close to the Burton-esque hell that I stumbled into. Everything alternated between cold, grimy steel and a sort of Candyland motif, with vivid striped plumbing and polka-dotted ductwork. I jumped as a shower of sparks flew from an immense robotic arm overhead, its rusted metal casting and tangled red wiring a stark contrast to its Mickey Mouse glove hand. I found myself retreating a few steps into the tunnel as it reached out, joints groaning from neglect, and pulled a tremendous lever with a shiny pink knob, an action inexplicably punctuated by the sound of a quacking duck. Instantly, a checkerboard-looking conveyor belt squealed to life, issuing forth a procession of what may have been dead pigs, though I couldn't see their heads, or even the ragged stumps where any may have been attached. With a ridiculous slide whistle sound, another huge object rose into view, an angular pink and purple funnel the size of a swimming pool. One by one, the mysterious carcasses tumbled off the belt and into that huge trumpet, each followed by a torturous rending sound and a brief but voluminous geyser of thick brown blood. The smell was overpowering. Mesmerized by the spectacle of Willy Wonka Sausage Factory, I nearly fell on my ass as a large object shot over my shoulder. It was a brain fly. It had come up through the tunnel behind me and narrowly dodged my head by a few inches. As my heart cautiously restarted itself, I filed away the knowledge that was still of no obvious concern to the things. Even intruding as I was on what may have been their headquarters, or at least an extension of it. I wasn't sure whether or not that was reassuring. The parasite had banked sharply upward as it left the tunnel, but I could still hear the distinct fluttering of big membranous wings between the whirring, grinding, and occasional goofy honking of the factory. I craned my head, waiting for the irregular crackling of the equipment to illuminate the gloom. Sure enough, I could see hundreds, thousands of glistening pink shapes passing a good 10 to 15 stories overhead, all in the same direction. I followed. A network of catwalks made navigating relatively easy, and I was usually able to keep sight of the concrete walls I'd emerged from. Tunnel entryways were frequent. Brainflies periodically zipping through to join their brothers and sisters above. Even if I lost my way, I was confident that another tunnel might empty back into the real world, and probably in a populated area. They needed bodies, after all. I shuddered, not at the thought, but how casually the thought had come. I was growing too used to this, uncomfortably comfortable. The Susian slaughterhouse offered no shortage of grotesque spectacles. Rivers of meat slush oozed their way along a metallic chute as wide as a city street, putrescent corpses bobbing sluggishly in the current, and sometimes against it. Towering circular saws loomed like macabre Ferris wheels, chewing their way through slabs of solid, fresh meat that could have been fed to the whole town. What living things could even have that much flesh on them? A steady splattering turned out to be a blender the size of a small house. Literally, just a scaled-up household blender. It even had a giant-sized dial, albeit with only one setting: Excite. I supposed you could describe the endless truckloads of live white mice poured into it as excited, in a sense. I passed bubbling lakes of entrails, fermented tanks of gasping fish heads, mountains of broken, bloodied bones. An endless procession of meat hooks ferried a bizarre menagerie of carcasses along the tangled railway system, from skinned cattle to things I doubt you have found in any textbook. They were insect-like forms as big as men, tentacled masses dribbling oddly colored ichor, and something I could only describe as a hairy swordfish. Their cargo was so twisted, it was some time before I even noticed what was wrong with the meat hooks themselves. They had no wheels, just clung to their rails by metallic, spider-like legs, tips tapping along with blinding speed. The further I advanced, the louder the wet, slimy flapping of the alien flock became. More and more streams were converging into a single mass migration, their collective wings nearly drowning out the buzzing, grinding, splattering of the factory.
I still wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I was getting closer. Entry 5.2. I had ascended 6 levels from my starting point when I first ran into a non-brainfly form of life. My mind almost tried to brush it off as a rat. At first, a tiny white shape scurrying in my peripheral vision. We both froze when I moved in for a closer look. The odd little being was only a few inches tall, pale and vaguely humanoid, with a large and nearly spherical head. It reminded me strongly of one of the eggheads, but there was little chance this thing had been a human. Where there should have been eyes, there were a pair of gaping, bloody-looking holes, and its mouth was a simple circular hole. In its pale, translucent little hands, it carried a hunk of meat. It didn't look dangerous, but it could have breathed fire for all I knew. I cautiously raised my shovel and took a step back, not wanting to arouse any aggression, and the diminutive little imp jerked into motion. In an instant, it crammed the meat into one of its empty eye holes and took a flying leap off the catwalk, landing with a soft, wet splat on a lower level and scampering off into the darkness. From that point on, the tiny creatures seemed to be everywhere. I'd catch them watching me from around the corner, or busily snatching scraps of food from the conveyor belt. I suppose the rat comparison wasn't that far off, but if the brain flies flew and the little goblin things were only vermin, exactly who or what had the catwalks been constructed for? I'd get my answer soon enough. Entry 5.3. Following the airborne river of winged brains, I was ultimately brought to what seemed at first to be a steel wall, held together by colossal beams and rivets. To either side, it appeared to gradually curve away, the exterior of a rough, circular structure. High above me, the stream of brain flies were pouring through a grated porthole 100 feet wide, gaps just large enough to accommodate their wingspans. I could make out additional portholes to my distant left and right, more slimy flocks streaming in. This had to be it, home base, the mothership. The catwalk continued through a significantly smaller porthole into something like a vast stadium, distant electric lights confirming a circular shape about a mile across. Its floor was solid, polished concrete, while its ceilings were obscured by a torrential storm of living bodies. Dozens of brain flies, streams converging into an open roof of looming concrete tubes in the center of it all. A good 20 stories in height, an eerie green glow poured from the top of the monolithic tower like some doorway to another realm. A wormhole back to whatever obscene universe the things truly called home. A three-dimensional web of suspended pathways encircled it all, intertwining with a network of immense grimy pipes a semi could have driven through. It was all so magnificent, so horrific, I almost didn't realize I was still moving forward, my jaw hanging in dumb fascination, nor did I immediately grasp the significance of a metallic sound from behind me, a sound like a gate being shut. My brain mulled over the thoughts for a few more moments before I wheeled around in a rush of panic. The tunnel was closed off. The soft roar of the brainfly tornado had joined a new sound, not unlike the beating of an alarm bell. Then came the meat. I had the good sense to start moving as soon as the nearest gaping pipe began to shudder and gurgle, trickling a thin stream of red-brown slime for a few moments before finally erupting with a torrent of chunky sludge. All meat and meat juice. A few yards away, another pipe vomited to life. At first, I thought the intention would be to drown me.
I didn't doubt for a second there was enough meat in the factory plumbing to fill this place completely, but it was quickly apparent that my demise would not be so simple. The meat seemed to spread out much farther than mere gravity would dictate. Wherever I ran, it seemed to flow directly towards me, winding in streams like a pseudopod of an enormous amoeba. Not my imagination. It was the worst-case scenario, but at this point, far from surprising, I'd already seen movement from the twitching thing that came out of the takeout window. Things that couldn't possibly have been alive, but wriggled frantically, even as they were torn apart and devoured by the increasingly fatter, greasier mouths of my neighbors. A chain of green-tinged sausages rose shakily from a nearby heap, like an intoxicated cobra. I gagged a little. Emerging mostly from the outer edges of the chamber, the living flesh was forcing me closer towards the tower, where I would have no choice but to ascend the catwalk. I was probably going to die either way, and it was probably going to be hideous. At least, I might sneak a glimpse at an alien world on my way out. Entry 5.4. By the time I had climbed only 3 levels, I couldn't see any empty floor space below me, only a solid lake of meat, rippling with unnatural life, like a pit of deformed, blood-soaked maggots. I could see pieces beginning to climb after me, questing blindly until it figured out the stairwell, or simply creeping snail-like up the side of the tower. A few managed to catch up with me, or even cut me off momentarily, but the shovel turned out to be an excellent choice. What I couldn't smash or sever, I heaved over the side. Something like an inside-out penguin toddled up to my feet on the 4th level. One good smack, and it crunched wetly into a perfect, comical disc, still wiggling uselessly. Rancid brains burst like spoiled pumpkins under my wrath. A writhing mass of intestines inexplicably squealed and died once I chopped off what it was loosely employing as a head. A giant heap of pinkish slime gave me some momentary trouble on the 6th level, shrugging off one blow after another until I was stricken by an overwhelming chemical stink and brandished one of my flares, hoping it might be flammable. As though it knew exactly what I was thinking, it retreated like a snail into a rusty metal drum it had been lugging around. Though individually pathetic, the meat creatures were persistent and increasingly bizarre. Somewhere on the 8th, possibly 9th level, I turned around to find a big fish head attempting to sneak up behind me, tiptoeing comically on a pair of eerily human female legs. It froze up when I coughed, as though realizing too late that I'd been watching it for 4 or 5 seconds. Some fat white bug, like a woodlouse, tumbled out of the fish's mouth, chittering angrily, and fled on its hind legs before knocking the fish thing over the edge. Huh. Weird. The further I progressed, the weirder the things emerging from the factory plumbing had grown. Things that must have grown and festered far longer in these lightless metal bowels. I could barely liken some of them to any animal or body part. Pustuled yellow tubes looped along like inchworms, and tentacled black blobs floundered like stranded fish in pools of their own yellow-green secretions. I was waging a war against hot dog scraps from Planet X. Entry 5.5. I was beginning to get cocky. No matter how horrendous these meat beasts were, they had a very real weakness. I was increasingly confident I could make it home alive, wondering if perhaps they had only put the world under some hypnotic spell because we were simply too powerful, too dangerous for them to defend against. I was beginning to feel like a hero after all, like I was living one of my video games. That self-important high was cut short on the 15th level, when the first real wrench was thrown into my hit things with a shovel strategy. The thing blocking my path was not made of meat. Not on the outside, at least. It appeared to be made entirely of iron, rugged and nearly black. A torso like a department store mannequin stood atop the jointed, knobby legs, and its single arm terminated at a pair of jagged tongs. Periodically, they clacked shut. The oversized head resembled some sort of huge pot or boiler with a pair of cartoonish painted eyes on it. An orange-yellow glow could be seen through the many cracks and vents. I didn't suspect there was much a shovel could do to this, and it neither backed off or approached. It simply stood there, waiting, daring me to make a move. I could see a dense river of meat bodies surging along the path only 3 feet below, making the same slow spiral towards the tower as I was. Fragile or not, there was no way I could keep their numbers at bay forever. I wondered if I'd be taken alive. A dozen things flashed before my mind. The eggheads, the things I'd seen, things I'd seen in PETA propaganda videos. Any one of them could be my fate. "Let's just talk about this, Sonny Mom." The voice snapped me back to reality, if you could call it reality. It had come from in front of me, from the robot cook, or whatever it was. "What?" "It doesn't have to be this way, Missy George." Besides its mangled grasp of pronouns, it spoke English with remarkable clarity. Its voice was soft and feminine, with just a slight metallic quality. "I'm sorry?" was all I could manage, still dazed. "We can put you right back where you belong, little thing-a-doc. We can even fix you up like the rest. You'll never know." I knew exactly what it was talking about. The brainwashing. As far as I knew, I was making first contact with a non-human intelligence, and I had a billion questions about what they were going to do to us, where they came from, what else was out there in the universe or multiverse or whatever we might be living in. Only one thing actually came out. "Fuck yourself." It sighed in a hollow, metallic sigh, a little smoke escaping from the face vent. It seemed to sink a little at my response. "If that's how you want it, whatchamawoozle." It rose threateningly on its 3 legs, and I realized that it reminded me of a barbecue grill. In the blink of an eye, its clawed arms shot out and clamped around the handle of my precious shovel, effortlessly tearing it from my grip and dropping it onto the walkway. Shit. It shot out again, and this time it got the back of my neck. It slammed me to the ground, taking apparent care not to choke me just yet, but to merely cause me considerable pain. Its legs clanged noisily as it positioned itself directly over me and planted its metal ass directly on my stomach, pinning me to the ground. Lines of black grease began to roll down the thing's artificial face, sizzling furiously. I screamed weakly through the creature's grasp when a single, tiny droplet met the exposed skin of my arm. It felt like I was being branded. The monster giggled. Tee-hee! It spoke out the laughter like it was reading from a bad script. If its eyes had been real, it would have been looking directly into mine, and if it had lips, I'm sure it would have been smiling. It bent forward, the grease still cascading in a thin curtain, threatening any moment to start raining in hissing streams onto my exposed face. The claw around my neck tightened, finally pinching shut my airway. It was going to burn my eyes out while it strangled me to death. I let go of the thing's arm to shield my face as best I could, wishing I'd had the foresight to wear heavier grade gloves as I waited for the torrent of boiling grease, the thing's giggling reaching a fever pitch. Hee 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 hee, ha 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 ho ho ho, huh? It stopped. The grease didn't come. Removing my hands from my eyes, I saw that the monster's head had turned away from me. You! It shrieked. I couldn't tell what it was looking at until it unexpectedly loosened its grip on my neck and lurched to its feet. I could see a small white shape out of the corner of my eye. "Oh, gross, gross, gross!" It wailed like a child as the rubbery hobgoblin scrambled up its metal body like a boneless gecko lizard. It started to stumble about, trying its best to pick off the teeming pest with a single arm, but they slipped through the claws like jelly. I wasn't sure how long it would be distracted, and I dove for my shovel before teetering painfully to my feet. I could see the smelling legion of meat just one level below. "Vile things, vile! They're in my vents!" I was almost too fascinated to act. The hobgoblin had pried the lid off that rusty grill head, exposing an oily, blackened little form underneath. It was too tangled and burnt to make out, but I could see various limbs waving frantically to keep the gremlin thing at bay. I raised my shovel, prepared to strike. All at once, the little creatures snapped their heads in my direction and dropped like flies from the metal thing, falling to the path and scattering out of sight. The grill face, too, turned towards me. "Thank you. You have no idea what..." I let out a berserker howl and brought down the shovel squarely on that black, twitching body, splattering it with a wet crunching and a deafening bang against the white-hot grill that it rested upon. The metal construct stood still and silent for a few agonizing moments before it finally began to pitch backwards, creaking like a rusty door before banging to the ground, dead or asleep or whatever I'd just done to it. I prodded it a few times before cautiously stepping around it and continuing up. Something didn't want me to reach the top, and I felt pretty good about that. Entry 5.6. The rest of my climb was relatively uneventful, broken only by the odd hot dog squid or scuttling pork ribs. I was a full 23 flights up when I found myself at the last rough level, the top of the tower, the walkway branching out in a perfect wall-to-wall spiderweb. Up close, the sight of the brain flies was more awesome and more hideous than I could have imagined. Bathed in that alien light, the roaring funnel of unearthly life was almost too beautiful to have burst its way through a formed human skull. The death toll they represented must have been staggering. That terrible beauty rather harshly clashed with the figure standing a few feet ahead of me on a raised, rectangular platform, back towards me as it overlooked the tower and appeared to fidget with a large control console. I blinked hard, trying to register its strangely familiar shape. It had no apparent head or neck. Its body only a broad, rounded mass, like a squarish barrel. A pair of dark, mushy limbs extended from its sides. A white object bobbed around on its upper surface. I didn't want to accept what I was looking at. It was too much, even now. It was just so stupid. It was a hamburger in a chef's hat, just like the logo. If I could sneak up on it, I could plunge my mighty blade into its big, stupid bread head. There was no way it could hear me coming above the teeming bugs. I took my first step, my first cautious step, and it whirled around. Damn it! For a long time, we just stared at one another, the rancid-looking beast regarding me with bulging, bloodshot eyes the size of soccer balls, oozing and twitching as it looked me up and down. I didn't know what else to do, what was going to finally break the staring contest. I lowered my shovel and raised my hand in greeting. "Hello." The moldering sandwich stood there for a few more moments before those slimy eyeballs rolled in their lidless socket, as if I had just said or done something more ridiculous than the thing's existence. I almost began stammering a follow-up statement when one of those slimy appendages suddenly reached for a huge bright red switch on its console and nonchalantly pressed it. It raised one sludgy beef hand and gave a sort of toodaloo finger wave as its entire platform abruptly plummeted through the floor and disappeared from sight. The elevator shaft sealed off behind it, and moments later, the catwalk began to flood with activity. Entry 5.7. From somewhere on the opposite side of the glowing, frying brain tornado came dozens of new shapes. Meat beings were pouring from some unknown new opening, already looking larger and meaner than any of those oozing rejects I'd been mowing down. I didn't suppose my little gremlin friends were waiting nearby with flamethrowers either. The first thing to reach me was a squiggly, bear-sized yellow mass of soft, tangible limbs rolling along at a seemingly abnormal speed. It looked almost like an octopus until a long neck snaked out from the warty folds, snapping at me like an orange beak. A giant, boneless chicken. Why was this my life now? With a surge of contemptuous bloodlust, I hacked mercilessly into the abominable thing long after it had ceased moving, only for something else to whistle just over my head. I spun around in the shredded remnants of the octobird, coming face to face with a featureless doll crotch and a pair of skinny legs, 6 feet high and fused at the hips. I staggered back, foolishly slipping in the scattered chicken guts, and landed flat on my back. The legs terminated in a needle-sharp lance of bone, precariously balanced on the metal mesh of the walkway. They raised one wicked lance in the air again, aiming straight for my eyes, and it was a miracle I put the shovel between us quick enough. The legs seemed to momentarily vanish with the speed of the strike. It took a moment to regain its balance as it bounced off the shovel, the tip of its bone holding up distressingly well. I barely managed to sit upright as it took a stab for my heart, and I scrambled to my feet just in time to deflect a third strike. Enraged, I swung the shovel like a barbarian's axe, and the legs toppled. While they flailed over the guardrail, I could swear to God that I heard them utter a soft, high-pitched, "Uh-oh." From another direction came a throbbing heart the size of a small car, ambling along on its branching veins, an equally gigantic steak knife protruding from its center like a metallic snout. It reared back, raising itself to full height, 8 feet on its tendrils, and let out a high-pitched, rat-like squeak. Nope. I attempted to flee down another branch of the metal web, but my course was soon interrupted by a clattering, scarecrow-like assemblage of bone shards and flimsy sinew, chattering its many fractured dog-like skulls as it swung a large, saw-toothed jawbone at my stomach. I struck back with my own weapon, its skull splintering even further beyond recognition. My adrenaline was surging, as single-minded as the gore-faced hordes themselves. I demolished one twisted child of Satan's deli after another. I toppled shuffling golems of pork scraps, wailing ghouls of dripping lard, a serpentine mass of fused chicken feet, and even that giant squeaking heart its arteries dousing me with a geyser of hot blood as it throbbed its last. I was almost disappointed by how easy it had all been. I shouldn't have been. As I stood up in a puddle of mashed viscera, blood, and who knew what else streaming off my face, I heard a mysterious clang echo through the vast space and felt the walkway shudder under my feet. I was followed by another clang. The shaking intensified. Clang! It reminded me rather uncomfortably of the huge, heavy footsteps on the grated floor. 2 guesses what it was. Come on. I dare ya. Entry 5-8. As the stomping grew louder, an even larger figure emerged from the other side of the flying brain tornado, a shape looming 15 feet tall in the dim, flickering green light, like the pressure cooker before it or whatever it was. It had a largely metallic appearance, though at the same time strangely organic. Its spindly, nearly skeletal body didn't seem like it should be heavy enough to rattle the floor so violently, its long, bony feet terminating in thin, sword-like talons. Most of its weight was likely concentrated in its head, immediately recognizable as the shape of a sausage grinder, slowly wavering with each laborious step. A pair of slimy eyeballs, like Burger Man's, stared down at me from the sides of the huge contraption, and where there should have been a handle, there was only a black skeletal arm, ending in another of those white cartoonish gloves. Its worst characteristic by far was the way it breathed, a hollow metallic wheeze of increasing speed and intensity, a panting of some starving dog who just caught a whiff of fresh roadkill. It stepped effortlessly from one catwalk to the other, like a spider scrambling in slow motion along the strands of its web. As it drew closer, something unimaginably worse began to happen. The meat, all the meat I had just slaughtered for at least its second time, was beginning to move once again. At once, the mutated horrors around me began to writhe, stumbled, and drug themselves towards the grinder, whose single arm shot out the moment one groping, rolling pile of giblets came within its impressive reach. It lifted the shiny, sticky mass into its filth-caked funnel on top of the grinding head and dropped it straight in. It continued to stomp its way in my general direction, scooping up more monsters and dumping them into its upper orifice until they were nearly spilling out over the side, a churning bathtub full of flesh and innards. The thing was slow, but as I ran from one end of the spider web to the next, I found every possible exit sealed tight, and by now, the meat rising from below had almost reached my level. There was no way out. There was nothing to fight. I could only keep running. I turned to look back at the grinder being, still ponderously and relentlessly pursuing me in a straight line as I was forced to zigzag. It snatched up the last staggering monster, some sort of spider-legged white-pod thing that resembled nothing I really recognized, and dumped it in with the rest. Without slowing down, the monster clenched its own blood-soaked glove and began spinning its entire arm in its socket, around and around and around with a ratchet-like noise, the collected mutants churning and twisting as they were sucked deeper into the grinder. I turned to continue running, but made it only a few more yards before a sickening, flatulent sputtering sound echoed through the chamber. Something thick, warm, and wet slammed into my back. The catwalk dropped away as I was swung through the air and brought to face the grinder man's unblinking gaze. I was being held tight in an enormous pink hand, wavering at the end of a tentacled limb comprised entirely of raw ground meat. It had formed the limb from every waking nightmare I'd spent the last of my energy putting down, and flung it like a lizard tongue to pinpoint accuracy, instantly subduing me from a good 20 meters away. I squirmed and thrashed desperately, but only felt further mired in the dense, tarry muck. The crank arm continued to twist, and more squirming noodles of processed tissue slithered along the length of its makeshift appendage, cocooning me in more layers of raw flesh. I was reminded yet again of a spider. As I sank deeper into that stinking, sloppy mire, I suddenly found myself transfixed by what was directly behind the metallic giant. I could finally see into the tower, into the vortex, down into where those writhing alien hatchers were all going in such a hurry. At first, I was confused. The significance of what I was seeing almost didn't want to register. Bitter, rancid meat juices were beginning to flood my mouth. Tendrils of meat sludge were probing my eyes and nose. My world was going back. It was being smothered to death. But on the inside, I just couldn't stop laughing. Entry 5.9. I awoke the following morning on the floor of my own home. Alive. My body was caked with meat gunk, my clothes sticky with blood. Not a dream. What little must have been in my stomach promptly emptied itself onto the carpet. I guess I'd been tearing those up soon, if there was any real point. I staggered to the shower, my mind racing with all I'd seen in the meat factory. They had apparently neither wished to kill me or erase my memories. I guess they knew as well as I did that there was nothing I could do to them. After all, if cattle couldn't do much to change their fate, what hope would there be for the cattle to feed? Entry 6. I tried to get a fountain drink at 7-Eleven. Some sort of pinkish gunk coiled out like soft-served, smelling like hot bologna. I cut open what I thought was a watermelon. The inside was a lot like a brain. I unwrapped an almond joy and got nothing but a length of bone filled with clear yellowish mush. I put money into a Coke machine. Saw the bottle tumble to the bottom. I reached through the door. I pulled out a heart. It was still beating. I hurled it to the pavement and stomped onto it. Nothing but a red, sticky stain was left. I came home starving, not even surprised by a flock of chickens hobbling around my front lawn, plucked and headless. I staggered to my kitchen and cracked into another box of cereal from my dwindling stash. Cat food stink. Cartoonish hamburger. The words Superior Food Market had replaced Frosted Flakes. Tony the tiger was now a grainy photograph of a bobcat. A box of Lucky Charms now said added tissue rind above a crappy JPEG stock image of a nobody leprechaun. Cheerios had become organism parts added fluids. The rest of the box was dominated by a close-up of a clammy gray intestine. I rummaged through the whole supply in a day. Red blood materials, marvelous food nuggets. None of this was there when I had bought it. I didn't bring home anything with a single letter out of whack. The last box used to be Cocoa Puffs, my favorite. Fred
Fred Flintstone still looked like he should. Just far too real. I could see every pore on his lifelike fleshy nose. This was now apparently a box of flavored meat substance. Whatever. What the fuck ever. I ate it. I ate it and it was delicious. So was the mysterious can of your flavored meat paste waiting for me on my coffee table. So was the cup of what looked and smelled like liquid bacon straight from my tap. The black thing in the refrigerator was as sweet as maple ham, even if it looked like the bastard child of a caterpillar and a starfish. The best thing by far was the steak. The huge, red, juicy steak ready for me on the front seat of my car. It wasn't even the flavor that made it good. It was the screaming.
And just like that, our stories are over for another day. I do hope you've enjoyed yourself on today's Cozy Horror, and I do hope we'll see you again very soon. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.